chains rattled at 6:12 a.m., just as Natalie Stacey was cutting through the loading dock behind the old textile factory on Alameda Street. She knew this shortcut like she knew the burn scars on her right hand from the espresso machine, intimately, painfully, automatically. 4 months now, ever since Carol had threatened to fire her if she clocked in late one more time. 4 months of shaving 8 minutes off her commute by slipping past the chain-link fence with the broken latch and crossing through the industrial graveyard that separated her bus stop from the cafe. The textile factory loomed on her left, all shattered windows and graffitied concrete, the kind of building that screamed abandoned in every rusted hinge and sagging doorframe. Natalie pulled her cafe apron tighter against the dawn chill, her sneakers crunching over broken glass and scattered debris. She had exactly 14 minutes to make the 6:30 opening, to get the espresso bar running before the downtown lawyers started their morning rush. Then she heard it. Not the usual sounds, not the pigeons roosting in the rafters or the wind whistling through broken panes. This was different. Human. A low groan, followed by the metallic scrape of something heavy dragging across concrete. Natalie stopped walking. Mind your business, she told herself. The same thing she'd been telling herself since she was 12 years old, and her grandmother took her to her first community meeting, her first protest, her first bail hearing for neighbours who couldn't afford representation. You're 2 tardies away from unemployment. You can't afford to be your grandmother's granddaughter today. But her feet had already turned toward the sound. Before this story pulls you in, if you love intense stories like this, hit subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. And tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Trust me, you're going to want to be here for how this ends. The rusted gate groaned as Natalie pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty street like a warning she chose to ignore. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped into the abandoned textile factory, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. But she couldn't, not when her sister's life hung in the balance. The air inside was thick with decay, mildew, rust, and something else she couldn't name. Shattered windows let in just enough moonlight to reveal the skeletal remains of machinery that hadn't run in decades. Conveyor belts sagged like broken spines. Looms stood frozen mid-weave, their threads now homes for spiders. She moved carefully, her footsteps too loud on the concrete floor, no matter how softly she tried to walk. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every creak of settling metal made her freeze. Just find the stairs. Get to the basement. Get Emma. The text message had been clear. Basement level. Midnight. Come alone. The photo attached had shown Emma bound to a chair, eyes wide with terror, a bruise blooming across her cheek. Natalie's hands had shaken so badly she'd almost dropped her phone. Now, threading through the maze of rusted equipment, she pulled out her phone again. The screen's glow felt dangerously bright in the darkness. No new messages, no updates, just that same horrifying image burned into her mind. A sound stopped her cold. Voices, low, male, speaking in rapid Korean, her pulse spiked. She killed the phone's light and pressed herself against a massive loom, barely breathing. The voices were coming from somewhere ahead, beyond the far wall where she could just make out a doorway she hadn't noticed before. She edged forward, inch by careful inch, until she reached the doorway. It opened onto a metal landing. Below it, barely visible in the gloom, a staircase descended into deeper darkness. The voices were clearer now, definitely Korean. At least 2 men, maybe more. Natalie's mind raced. This is insane! Call the police! Get help! But the message had been explicit. Police equals Emma dies. She'd already made her choice the moment she'd walked through that gate. The staircase was steep, each metal step slick with condensation. She gripped the railing, testing each footfall before committing her weight. The descent felt endless, like she was travelling into the Earth's core rather than just one floor down. Halfway down, she saw the light. A sickly fluorescent glow spilled from an opening at the bottom. The voices stopped abruptly. Had they heard her? She froze, counting her own heartbeats. 5, 10, 15. Then the voices resumed, casual again. She exhaled slowly. 3 more steps. 2, 1. The underground level opened before her, like something from a nightmare dressed as a warehouse. The space was vast, concrete pillars rising to support the factory above. But this wasn't abandoned. Far from it. Crates were stacked along one wall. Not old, dusty crates, new ones, stamped with shipping labels in Korean and Chinese characters. Industrial shelving units held boxes of electronics, designer handbags, what looked like pharmaceuticals. This was a smuggling operation, a serious one. And standing guard near the far end, exactly where the corridor split into 2 passages, were 3 men. They wore dark tactical clothing, not quite uniforms, but close. Each one armed. She could see the weapons holstered at their sides, the casual readiness in their postures. These weren't amateurs, these were professionals. One of them laughed at something another said. None of them had noticed her yet, partially hidden as she was behind a pillar near the staircase landing. Natalie's breath came in shallow gasps. Emma was down here somewhere, behind one of those passages, behind those armed men who would absolutely not just let her walk past and collect her sister. She'd walked into a trap, with her eyes wide open, and now she had to figure out how to spring it without getting them both killed. The man closest to her shifted his stance, his hand moving toward his hip, and then his radio crackled to life. The guard's boots echoed down the corridor, fading into the distance. Natalie pressed herself against the cold concrete wall, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone in the building could hear it. She had maybe 3 minutes. 4, if she was lucky. The broken pallet felt rough under her fingers as she dragged it across the floor, positioning it near the storage room entrance. Her cafe apron, the one with the faded logo she'd worn for 6 years of early mornings and lonely nights, was wrapped around her arm like a shield. Or maybe a white flag. She wasn't sure anymore which one she needed. This is insane, she thought. You're 63 years old, you make cappuccinos, you don't break into foreign military compounds. But then she thought of Sung-ho's face in that photograph, the fear in his eyes that the grainy image couldn't quite hide. She struck the match. The apron caught faster than she expected, flames licking up the fabric with hungry orange fingers. She dropped it onto the pallet and kicked it hard against the wall, then started screaming in rapid, broken Korean she'd rehearsed in her head a dozen times. "Fire! Fire! Help!" The outer guard came running, exactly as she'd hoped. He barreled past her, shouting into his radio, and in that split second of chaos, smoke billowing, alarms beginning to wail, Natalie slipped through the doorway he'd been guarding. The hallway inside was narrow, dim. It smelled like disinfectant and something else, something that made her stomach turn, fear. The place reeked of fear. 3 doors. She counted them as she moved, her shoes silent on the linoleum. The first was locked. The second was open but empty, just a desk and filing cabinets. The third door had a small window. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the frame as she pulled herself up to look inside. And there he was. Sung-ho sat on a metal chair in the centre of a concrete room. His head bowed, his shoulders curved inward like he was trying to make himself disappear. His shirt was torn. There was a bruise blooming purple across his left cheekbone. But it was him. God help her, it was really him. Natalie's breath caught in her throat. 27 years collapsed into nothing. She was 17 again, holding his hand under the cherry blossoms, believing in forever the way only young hearts can. She was 23, reading his last letter with tears streaming down her face, knowing she'd never see him again. She was 63, staring at the man she'd loved and lost, who was supposed to be a memory, but was somehow impossibly real. His head lifted slowly, as if he could sense someone watching. Their eyes met through the glass. For a moment, the world stopped. His face went white. His lips formed a single word, silent but unmistakable. Natalie. She pressed her palm against the window. He stood, stumbling slightly, his hand reaching toward hers even though a wall of glass and 27 years stood between them. Then footsteps, heavy, fast, coming from behind her. "Joji Seo," a voice barked. "Stop right there." Natalie spun around. 2 guards were advancing down the hallway, one with his hand already on his weapon. She looked back at Sung-ho. His expression had transformed from shock to terror, not for himself, but for her. He was shaking his head frantically, mouthing words she couldn't hear but understood perfectly. "Run, please run." The guards were 15 feet away, 10. Natalie's mind raced. She'd found him. After all these years, all the sleepless nights wondering if he was alive, if he remembered her, if their love had been real or just a beautiful lie, she'd found him. But finding him and saving him were 2 very different things. And right now, with armed guards closing in and Sung-ho's desperate eyes begging her to save herself, Natalie realised something that made her blood run cold. She might have just made the biggest mistake of her life, or the last one. I'll never forget the moment I first saw his face, not through a crack in the wall, not through a whisper in the dark, but standing right there, inches away from me, blood streaking down his temple, eyes wide with something between terror and hope. Sung-ho. The name I'd been whispering to myself for days like a prayer. The voice that had kept me sane when everything else felt like it was slipping away. And now he was here, in my cell, and we had minutes, maybe less, before they came back. "Pipe," he hissed, his English broken but desperate. "You have pipe, yes?" I nodded, my hands shaking as I grabbed the rusted metal bar I'd been hiding under the filthy mattress. It wasn't much. Barely 2 feet long, corroded at the edges, probably older than both of us combined, but it was all we had. "Here." He pointed to the bolts anchoring my chain to the concrete wall, thick industrial bolts that had held God knows how many girls before me. "You hit, hard, many times." "What about you?" My voice cracked. "Your chain." "Mine already loose." He lifted his wrist and I saw it, the raw, bleeding skin where he'd been working the metal against the concrete for what must have been weeks. "But yours, you need help." I looked at the pipe in my hands, then at the bolts, then at him. This was real. This was actually happening. "When they took guard to East Building," Sung-ho whispered, glancing toward the corridor, "we have maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. You must start now." I positioned the pipe against the first bolt, my whole body trembling. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching myself from somewhere outside my own skin. How had it come to this? How was I, Natalie Chen, a girl who used to worry about SAT scores and college essays, now standing in a basement in Cambodia with a rusted pipe, trying to literally hammer my way to freedom? "Now!" Sung-ho urged. "Hit!" I swung. The clang echoed through the cell like a gunshot, and we both froze, listening, waiting. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Nothing. "Again," he whispered. "Harder. You must—" I swung before he could finish. Again, again. Each strike sent vibrations shooting up my arms, rattling my teeth. But I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The bolt was loosening. I could feel it shifting in the concrete, just barely, but it was moving. "Good, good," Sung-ho breathed, but his eyes kept darting to the door. "Keep going, not much time." Sweat poured down my face. My palms were slick against the pipe. Every muscle in my body screamed, but I kept swinging, because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about him, about the girl I'd heard crying 2 nights ago in a room I couldn't see, about every person trapped in this nightmare who'd run out of hope before someone threw them a lifeline. The first bolt finally gave way with a grinding screech that made us both wince. Yes! Sung-ho's face lit up for just a second before the fear crashed back in. Second one. Fast. I moved to the next bolt, repositioning the pipe with shaking hands. This one was deeper, tighter. I could already tell it wasn't going to come easy. I swung, again, and then we heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Coming down the corridor. Sung-ho's face went white. "They coming back," he whispered. And the terror in his voice turned my blood to ice. "They not supposed to come back yet." The footsteps got louder, closer. I looked at the second bolt, still firmly embedded in the concrete, at Sung-ho, at the pipe in my hands. "What do we do?" I breathed. He grabbed my wrist, his fingers cold and desperate. "You hide pipe, now, and no matter what happened next." The door handle started to turn. I pressed my shoulder under his arm and felt his full weight sag against me. This wasn't some romantic movie moment. Sung-ho was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and ragged, and every step sent a fresh wave of blood soaking through the makeshift bandage I'd tied around his side. We had maybe 2 minutes before someone checked that storage room. Maybe less. "Stay with me," I whispered, more command than plea. His head lolled forward, but his legs kept moving. Muscle memory, survival instinct, something. I didn't care what it was as long as it kept him upright. The service tunnel stretched ahead like a concrete throat, dim emergency lights casting everything in sickly yellow. My sensible work flats weren't made for this. Each step echoed too loud, and I kept thinking about the security cameras, the guards, all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. But I'd already made my choice back in that room. There was no unmade decision now. Sung-ho stumbled, and I nearly went down with him. His weight was impossible, all lean muscle and dead weight combined. My shoulder screamed in protest, but I adjusted my grip, half dragging him now, his feet barely scraping the floor. Come on, I breathed. The exit sign glowed ahead like salvation, green and distant. 50 feet, 40. I could hear his breathing changing, getting thinner, and a sick panic clawed at my chest. What if he passed out? What if I'd just killed us both for nothing? Behind us, somewhere in the building's maze of corridors, a door slammed. My heart stopped. Then it started again, hammering so hard I thought my ribs might crack. I picked up the pace, practically running now, Sung-ho's toes dragging behind us, his head pressed against mine, and I could feel how hot his skin was through my scrubs. Fever. Infection. The bullet wound was worse than I'd thought. We burst through the exit door into the parking garage, and the cold night air hit like a slap. My 2008 Honda Civic sat exactly where I'd left it that morning, back row, under the flickering light, looking like the most beautiful piece of junk I'd ever seen. I fumbled for my keys with one hand while keeping Sung-ho upright with the other, and for one horrible second I thought I'd lost them. Then my fingers closed around cold metal. Almost there, I told him. Or maybe I told myself. I wrenched open the back door and half-shoved, half-guided him onto the seat. He collapsed across it, curling instinctively around his injury, and the dome light showed me just how pale he'd become. Too pale. Grey pale. His eyes were closed now. No, stay awake. I grabbed his face, patted his cheek harder than I meant to. His eyelids fluttered. "Mianhe," he mumbled. "Sorry." "Don't apologise. Just don't die in my car." I slammed the door and ran to the driver's side, keys shaking in my hand. The engine turned over on the second try, thank God for small mercies, and I threw it in reverse without even checking my mirrors. Tyres squealed. Someone shouted something behind us, but I was already accelerating toward the exit, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. In the rearview mirror, I saw them, 2 men in dark suits spilling out of the same door we'd just escaped through, pointing, running. One reached for something at his hip. I floored it. The Civic shot out of the parking garage and onto the street, and I took the first turn without signalling, then another, weaving through late-night traffic like I knew what I was doing. I didn't. My whole body was shaking, and I couldn't stop checking the mirror, expecting headlights, expecting everything to end. But the streets behind us stayed empty, for now. I glanced back at Sung-ho, unconscious and bleeding all over my back seat, and one thought crystallized with perfect terrifying clarity. They'd seen my face. They knew I worked there, and they were absolutely going to come looking. I didn't think about the blood until we were already in the stairwell. It was everywhere, soaking through his jacket, dripping onto the concrete steps, leaving a trail that anyone with half a brain could follow straight to apartment 2B, my apartment. The place I'd lived for 3 years without so much as a noise complaint, and now I was dragging a bleeding spy through the door like some kind of low-budget action movie. Except this wasn't a movie. The blood was real. The man barely conscious on my futon was real. And the fact that I'd just thrown away my entire career, my life, for someone whose real name I probably didn't even know, that was painfully, terrifyingly real. "Bathroom," he managed, his voice tight with pain. You need to sit still." I cut him off, already tearing through my linen closet for anything clean. Dish towels, a bath towel with a faded palm tree on it from some long-ago vacation. I grabbed the hydrogen peroxide from under the sink, the bottle I'd bought 2 years ago for a scraped knee and never touched again. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. The studio apartment suddenly felt impossibly small. 1 room, 1 window overlooking a parking lot, a kitchenette that barely fit a microwave. This was supposed to be temporary when I moved in, a stepping stone, somewhere to land while I built my real life. Now it was a crime scene. I knelt beside him, peeling back the blood-soaked fabric of his shirt. The wound was deep, a gash across his ribs that made my stomach turn. Not a bullet, something sharp, a knife maybe, or something worse I didn't want to imagine. "This is going to hurt," I warned. He laughed, actually laughed, a dark, breathless sound. "Yeah, I figured." The peroxide hissed and bubbled when it hit the wound. He didn't make a sound, but I felt his entire body go rigid. I pressed the dish towel against his side, applying pressure like I'd seen in a dozen TV shows, but never thought I'd actually need to do. "Why did you come to me?" The question came out barely louder than a whisper. "You could have gone anywhere, called someone trained for this, someone who actually knows what they're doing." He opened his eyes then, those sharp, calculating eyes that had watched me across the office for months, but now they looked different. Tired, almost vulnerable. "Because you're the only one who didn't look away," he said. I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process that I'd been seen when I thought I was invisible. That my stupid, reckless decision to follow him, to help him, had somehow mattered before I even made it. The towel was already soaking through. "Natalie." My name sounded strange in his mouth, serious, heavy. "You need to understand something. What happened tonight, what you saw, you can't go back from this. They know you helped me. They know you left with me." Ice flooded my veins. "They?" "The people I work for, the people who did this." He gestured weakly at his side. "You're not just unemployed anymore, you're a liability." The word hung in the air like poison. Liability. I thought about my little life, my tiny apartment. My dead-end job that I'd just walked away from. My parents back in Ohio who thought I was doing just fine out here in California, living the dream. I thought about how none of it had ever felt real anyway. How I'd been sleepwalking through my own existence, waiting for something, anything to wake me up. Well, I was awake now. "So what do we do?" I asked, pressing harder on the wound even though my arms were starting to ache. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket with his good arm and pulled out a small black device I didn't recognize. "We run," he said, "and we hope they're slower than I think they are." Outside in the parking lot below, a car door slammed, then another. The knock came at 6:47 a.m., not the polite, hesitant tap of a neighbour, not the impatient buzz of a delivery driver. This was 3 sharp strikes, commanding, deliberate, final. Natalie froze halfway to the coffee maker, her hand still wrapped around the handle. Her heart knew before her mind did. This wasn't random. This wasn't innocent. She moved to the peephole, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. What she saw made her stomach drop. A man in a charcoal suit stood directly in front of her door, hands clasped at his waist, posture military straight. Behind him, 4 others fanned out in formation, dark tactical gear, earpieces, expressionless faces. Not police, not FBI, something else entirely. The man in the suit tilted his head slightly, as if he could sense her watching. "Ms. Reeves," he said, his voice calm and precise. "My name is Agent Min. I'm here about Sung Ho Park." Her breath caught. How did they know her name? How did they know about Sung Ho? She didn't open the door, couldn't. Her fingers trembled against the wood. "We need to speak with you immediately," Agent Min continued. "It's a matter of national security. I'm sure you understand the gravity of that phrase." National security. The words hit like ice water. She thought of Sung Ho's face in the hospital, the fear in his eyes when she'd asked if he was safe, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only person in the world he could trust. And now this. Men with guns at her door, men who knew exactly where to find her. "I'm going to open this door," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "but I need to see identification first." Agent Min reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and held a badge up to the peephole. Department of Defense, Intelligence Division, his photo, his name. She unlocked the door. The moment it opened, Agent Min stepped inside, his team following in synchronized silence. They moved through her apartment like shadows, checking windows, scanning corners, securing the perimeter. One of them stationed himself at the door. Another moved to the balcony. Natalie stood frozen in her own living room, suddenly a stranger in her own home. "Ms. Reeves," Agent Min said, turning to face her. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "How much did Sung Ho Park tell you?" "About what?" she asked, though she already knew the answer wouldn't matter. "About who he is, what he was doing in Seoul, why he's here." She swallowed hard. "He didn't tell me anything, he was barely conscious." "But you spoke to him," Agent Min interrupted. "Multiple times. You were seen entering his room after hours. You made physical contact. You asked questions." Her pulse hammered in her ears. They'd been watching, recording, tracking every moment. "I'm a nurse," she said, her voice shaking now. "I was doing my job." Agent Min's expression didn't change. "Your job ended the moment Sung Ho Park became a classified asset. Everything you saw, everything you heard, everything you think you know, it's now part of an active intelligence operation." The room felt smaller, airless. "What does that mean?" she whispered. Agent Min stepped closer. "It means your normal life, the one you woke up to this morning, is over. You're involved now, whether you intended to be or not, and there are people who will do anything to get to Sung Ho, people who won't hesitate to use you to do it." Her knees went weak. "Use me? I don't know anything." "You know enough," he said quietly. "And that makes you a target." One of the tactical agents spoke into his earpiece. his voice low and clipped. "Perimeter secure. No visual on secondary surveillance." Secondary surveillance. Someone else was watching. Agent Min's gaze never left hers. "Pack a bag, Ms. Reeves. You're coming with us." "Where?" The word barely made it out. He didn't answer. Instead, he glanced at his watch, then back at her. "We have 15 minutes before they figure out we're here." I stared at the beige walls of my new prison, because let's be honest, that's exactly what it was. They called it a safe house. A secured apartment in Century City with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city I could see but no longer touch. Protected guest, they said, as if the 2 agents stationed outside my door were there for my comfort. I knew better. The apartment was nice enough, sterile really. Everything looked like it came from a catalogue. Cream sofa, glass coffee table, abstract art that meant nothing. Not a single thing in this place felt like mine. Not a photograph, not a coffee mug I'd chipped 3 years ago and refused to throw away. Nothing that proved Natalie Chen had ever existed before this moment. Agent Morrison had driven me here himself, his jaw tight the entire ride. "It's temporary," he'd said, which was federal speak for "we have no idea how long." He'd handed me a phone, their phone, monitored, of course, and told me someone would bring groceries. Then he'd left, and I'd heard the deadbolt click from the outside. I walked to the window, pressed my palm against the cool glass. Somewhere down there, people were living their lives, going to work, meeting friends for lunch, complaining about traffic. Normal things I used to do 6 days ago, before Marcus Webb had smiled at me across a charity gala and set this nightmare in motion. My reflection stared back at me, hair still perfect from this morning's salon appointment, makeup carefully applied, designer dress I'd probably never wear again. I looked like the Natalie everyone knew. Investment analyst, daughter of Chinese immigrants who'd clawed their way to the American dream. The responsible one who always had her life together. But that Natalie wouldn't have worn a wire, wouldn't have stood in Marcus Webb's office while FBI agents burst through the door, wouldn't be standing here now, watching her entire life dissolve like sugar in rain. I pulled out the monitored phone. 3 contacts, Agent Morrison, Agent DeMarco, crisis hotline, that was it. That was my entire world now. I wanted to call my mother. God, I wanted to hear her voice, even if it meant enduring her questions, her worry, her inevitable disappointment that I'd somehow gotten myself into this situation. But Morrison had been clear, no contact with family until they'd assessed the risk level. Webb's network was extensive. They needed to make sure no one connected to me was in danger. Or maybe they just needed to make sure I couldn't tell anyone what I'd seen, what I knew, what I'd agreed to testify about. The paranoia crept in like fog, slow, suffocating. Were they protecting me, or were they keeping me quiet? Was I a witness, or a liability they hadn't figured out what to do with yet? A knock at the door made me jump. I turned, heart hammering, and watched through the peephole as Agent DeMarco held up a paper bag. Groceries. She didn't smile when I opened the door. "You settling in okay?" Her eyes scanned the apartment behind me like she was cataloguing everything. "As okay as anyone would be." I took the bag. "How long am I?" "We're still assessing." She cut me off with practiced ease. "Webb's attorney filed a motion this morning. Things are moving faster than we anticipated." My stomach dropped. What kind of motion? DeMarco's expression shifted, just barely, but I'd spent enough time reading people across negotiation tables to catch it. Something she didn't want to tell me, something that changed the game. "We'll brief you tomorrow," she said, already stepping back. "Get some rest." The door closed, the lock clicked. I stood there holding a bag of groceries I hadn't chosen, in an apartment I hadn't picked, waiting for a tomorrow that would bring news I already knew I wouldn't want to hear. And I realised with cold, creeping certainty I wasn't just being protected, I was being contained. The monitor flatlined for half a second before correcting itself, the sharp beep slicing through the quiet like a warning shot. Natalie's breath caught anyway. She stood just outside the surgical ward doors, fingers clenched around a paper cup of vending machine coffee she hadn't touched. It had been 3 hours since the doctors rushed Sung-ho through imaging, 3 hours of whispered medical terms she didn't fully understand but somehow felt in her bones. Internal bleeding, fractured ribs, organ trauma, risk assessment, risk. The word followed her like a shadow. A nurse stepped out, scanning the hallway. "Natalie?" Her heart jumped. "Yes. He's asking for you. We're prepping him for surgery. It'll only be a minute." Natalie nodded before her brain caught up. Her legs carried her forward, down the sterile hallway that smelled faintly of antiseptic and cold metal. She'd walked into dangerous places before. Basements, alleyways, locked doors she shouldn't have opened. This felt different. Sung-ho lay on the bed beneath harsh white lights. IV lines threading into his arm, monitors blinking steadily beside him. His skin looked paler than she remembered, the sharp strength in his posture softened by exhaustion and pain medication, but his eyes were alert when he saw her, focused, grounded, like he'd been waiting. "You came," he said quietly. "Of course I came." Her voice cracked before she could stop it. She stepped closer, resting her hand lightly against the edge of the bed. "They said you're going into surgery." A corner of his mouth lifted. "Dangerous surgery," he corrected gently. "The kind where doctors stop promising things." Her chest tightened. "Don't say that." "I'm not afraid," he said. Then, after a beat, "I'm unsettled." That surprised her more than anything. Sung-ho had faced threats, guns, blood, betrayal, and never once looked shaken. But now, lying still, surrounded by machines, he looked human in a way she hadn't seen before. "Why?" she asked softly. His gaze drifted to the ceiling for a moment, then back to her. "In my world, people help you because they want something. Loyalty, leverage, fear, control." His fingers curled slightly against the blanket. "Even kindness has a price tag." Natalie swallowed. "You didn't know who I was when you cut those chains," he continued. "You didn't owe me anything. You didn't gain anything." His eyes met hers, steady and unguarded. "You helped me just because it was right." The words settled between them, heavier than any confession. Natalie felt her throat tighten. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I was scared. I wanted to walk away." "But you didn't." She shook her head. "My grandmother used to say, if you walk past suffering, you become part of it. I guess that voice just wouldn't leave me alone." Sung-ho studied her like he was memorizing something precious. "In my life," he said quietly, "right and wrong were always negotiable, flexible, convenient. You made them solid again." Her eyes burned unexpectedly. No one had ever said something like that to her. She was just a waitress. A girl trying to make rent on time, someone who survived by staying small and careful. And somehow, to him, she'd changed something fundamental. "I needed you to know that," he said. "In case I don't wake up the same." Her fingers tightened on the bed rail. "You're going to wake up," she said firmly, "and you're going to complain about hospital food and scare the nurses and pretend you're fine even when you're not." A faint chuckle escaped him. "You sound confident." "I am." The nurse cleared her throat gently from the doorway. "We need to take him now." Sung-ho turned back to Natalie, his voice lowered. "If things go wrong, don't carry this with you. You already gave me something no one else ever did." Natalie leaned closer without thinking. "You're not done yet," she whispered. "Don't say goodbye like that." His gaze softened. then sharpened with something unreadable. "Then stay close," he said. "When I wake up, there's something I need to tell you." Before she could ask what, the staff began wheeling the bed toward the operating room. The doors swung open, swallowing the light, the machines, the man who had rewritten her sense of right and wrong. Natalie stood frozen in the hallway long after the doors closed, and for the first time since that morning behind the factory, she felt the weight of a choice she hadn't realized she was still making. The hospital rooms smelled like antiseptic and rain-soaked concrete, the kind of clean that never quite erased what had almost been lost. Natalie stood by the window, fingers pressed into the cold glass, watching the city breathe below. Headlights slid through puddles like slow-moving stars. Somewhere down there, life kept moving. People laughed, argued, ordered coffee, missed buses, normal things, safe things. Behind her, Sung-ho shifted against the pillows. The sound still made her heart stutter. Every time he moved, every shallow breath, every quiet exhale reminded her how close he'd come to disappearing entirely. The memory replayed uninvited. Blood on her hands, the way his eyes had fluttered shut, the awful weight of thinking she'd been too late. She hadn't told him how many nights she'd slept sitting upright in a plastic chair, afraid that if she closed her eyes, he might not be there when she opened them again. "You're going to crack that window," he murmured, voice rough but alive. She turned, forcing a small smile. "Wouldn't be the worst thing I've broken lately." His mouth curved faintly, but the humour didn't quite reach his eyes. There was something sharpened there now. Not pain, not fear. Readiness. That was when she knew. "They cleared you," she said softly. He nodded. "Another week of observation. Then I go back." Back. The word landed between them like a dropped blade. Back to shadows and codes and names that were never real. Back to violence disguised as duty. Back to a world that swallowed people whole and didn't apologise for the mess it left behind. Natalie felt something tighten in her chest. Not jealousy, not anger. Terror. The quiet kind. The kind that whispered how easy it would be to disappear into someone else's gravity until you forgot your own name. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. Up close, the bruises were fading into yellow and grey, like storm clouds retreating. He looked almost normal, almost safe. "Does it scare you?" she asked before she could stop herself. He studied her carefully. Every day. The honesty surprised her more than any lie could have. She swallowed. Then why keep doing it? His gaze drifted to the ceiling. "Because some worlds don't let you leave clean." Natalie understood that too well. She'd grown up learning how people got trapped. By money, by loyalty, by love that asked for more than it ever gave back. She thought about the version of herself she'd become lately. The late nights, the constant scanning of exits, the way silence no longer felt peaceful, only suspicious. How her laughter came slower, quieter, like something borrowed. She loved him. The realization didn't arrive like thunder, and it slipped in like a bruise you noticed only when you touched it, and that scared her even more. Because loving him meant orbiting danger. It meant normal would never belong to her again. It meant choosing a life where every goodbye might actually be the last. Her fingers curled into the blanket. "I can't follow you back into that," she said quietly. He turned toward her fully now. "Natalie." "I know," she rushed, emotion climbing her throat. "I know you didn't ask me to. That's not the point. The point is, I'm starting to disappear in your world. And if I stay, I don't think I'll ever find my way back to myself." Silence stretched, heavy, honest. For a moment, she thought he might argue, might promise safety, might reach for her hand and make the decision harder than it already was. Instead, he simply nodded once. "I never wanted to be your cage," he said. That was when her eyes burned. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead gently against his. The closeness was unbearable and perfect all at once. She memorized the warmth of him, the steadiness of his breath, the quiet strength that had pulled her into a storm she hadn't known existed. "Promise me you'll survive," she whispered. His hand brushed her wrist. "I've gotten very good at it." They didn't say goodbye the way movies did. There were no dramatic speeches, no last kisses timed with swelling music, just a shared exhale, a long look. Two people choosing different directions while still standing in the same space. Natalie left before she could change her mind. The hallway lights blurred as she walked. Her chest felt hollow and painfully full at the same time. Each step away felt like tearing loose a piece of herself she wasn't sure would ever grow back. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled washed clean, like the world offering fresh starts she didn't quite believe in yet. Days later, she heard he'd been discharged. Weeks later, his number went silent. No texts, no calls, no trace. It was what she'd wanted. It was what she'd needed. And somehow, it still felt like the wrong kind of victory. One evening, standing behind the cafe counter as steam curled from the espresso machine, Natalie caught her reflection in the stainless steel. She looked steadier, stronger, more like the girl she used to be. But there was a quiet ache behind her eyes that hadn't been there before. She realised then, independence didn't mean untouched. Freedom didn't mean unscarred. Sometimes reclaiming yourself meant carrying the absence of someone who had briefly made the world feel dangerously alive. Somewhere out there, Sung-ho had returned to the shadows, and she had let go of the only real connection she'd ever had. The bell over the cafe door chimed. Natalie looked up. Her heart didn't know yet whether it was hope or memory making it race. You have not enough humanizer words left. Upgrade your surfer plan. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it means knowing when to walk away before you lose who you are. Not every connection is meant to last forever. Some come into your life to wake you up, to teach you what you deserve, and to show you the strength you didn't know you had. And choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you brave. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on what it reminded you about your own life, the risks you take, the boundaries you protect, and the courage it takes to let go. Thank you for watching. I truly appreciate you being here, and I'll see you in the next video.